Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again. This time we have this wonderful guest who is joining us from Florida.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, and we can see your screen. And we're going into, this is correct, navigating complex land use and policy challenges in a rapidly changing global landscape. And leading the conversations, I would love to introduce Cynthia Spidell, and she's the Associate Director of Planning at Stearns Weaver Miller. And she brings over 25 years of experience in both public and private sectors. She holds an MBA in international management, has a bond broker license from the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, or she used to, and currently she's focused on land use, zoning, permitting, and she has a strong background in investment banking and planning. She has worked on numerous transformative projects in Florida and is actively involved in various professional and community roles, including the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Technical Advisory Committee. She is an accomplished leader, and yes, we are in celebrating the Women's Empowerment Month. So, a woman accomplished leader and a visionary thinker who's passionate about shaping inclusive, sustainable strategies in times of constant change, which we happen to be in a period of extreme change currently. So we're looking forward to her wisdom. She's drawing on her extensive background in policymaking and community building, very important. And because she excels at translating big picture ideas into practical, human-centered solutions. So her dedication to fostering open dialogue and collaboration has set her apart as a trusted partner for organizations seeking to create meaningful long-term impact, all crucial today. She joins us to share valuable insights on how we can bridge personal development and effective policy for a truly sustainable future. And I know I've already gotten questions. How does this relate to transpersonal psychology? Well, it does, because this is how we like to think about business and policy making, bridging, implementing, being practical and tactical with heart and soul. So without further ado, Cynthia, maybe we should go to the next slide.
Sure. Oh,
One back.
so yeah.
There we go. So today's agenda is really large. We had talked about it since Cynthia and I, but we wanted to take an overall view because we're lucky to have somebody like her here today who can do this with us. So we're looking at balancing public and private interests. What does that mean? Why is that important? Global trends. What is happening at the moment? What is government? What is private? What are the trends overall geopolitically? Policy making and the geopolitical shifts that are happening. How do we retain an ability to be strong in times of such change? And of course, relying on whole systems and whole person approaches, because this is what we do here. So, Cynthia, welcome. Thank you so much for coming today and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. So as Dorote mentioned, or Dr. Lucci, I am an AICP certified planner, and I have about 20 years of experience, both the private and public sectors. I started out in local government here in Florida and then made the transition to the private side. And so, in terms of, so Dr. Lucci and I have been talking a lot about like how this can be meaningful for you. And I guess it's just a lot of, collaboration and cooperation, listening, and that type of thing. So we thought it would be a real interesting example to kind of go through what planners do, and maybe we can inspire a few urban planners here in the student body. as a result of that. So moving on to our next slide. Um, so balancing public and private interests, what does that mean? Well, it can mean different things, and it can mean different things all over the world. So what I really like about this little map here is that it shows that there are different legal systems throughout the world. And you can see where the United States is, we are common law. And that basically stems from the fact that we're an offshoot of the UK. You know, the United States broke away from the UK with the Declaration of Independence. But a lot of the world is civil law. And civil law, like in Germany, for example, means that they've got this civil law book, you know, and all the regulations and all the laws and the rules of the code are sort of listed out there. But that's not the case in the US. In the US, we're based on common law, which means we look to cases. So as cases and lawsuits work its way through the system, that then in turn affects how we might make or navigate developments. And it could be an office development, it could be a multi-use development, it could be one city developing in one city versus in another city. It can be an industrial park. So these prior cases that happen, we as planners have to be educated in. And then we basically take that knowledge and we apply it forward. So again, what does the government do? So depending on what sort of project you're working on, and it could be like a you know, a big master planning project in China, or it could be, you know, developing a single family development in the US. So what does it do? And it just depends on where you are. So in the US, I just thought it would be helpful if I just kind of give a little brief overview of what the government does here. And here's a list of items such as protecting public health, safety, and welfare, taxing, contracts, property, private versus public, defining what a private right is and what those relationships are, whether that's marriage, getting an inheritance or adopting a child, issuing development orders and permits with or without conditions. So, and punishing lawbreakers as criminals. So those are the types of things that the government does. So again, going back to why the US might be a little different than some other places, we have a constitution, and we have this concept called police power. So who has the police power and who doesn't? And I'll go into this in a little more detail in some of the next slides. And if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. You know, what is police power and who has it? So the federal government does not have it, but state and local governments do. And local governments, it kind of depends. So I'm in the state of Florida, and Florida is kind of considered a 50-50 state in terms of Dillon's rule and home rule. However, yes, the state government is inherent, its police power is inherent in its state sovereignty, and it does not need to be expressly stated in each constitution for each state. And a state can basically say a city or a county, which is a subset of the state, right? So our states are broken into counties and cities, which I guess in other countries could be municipalities or provinces that might have their own local government. So in the US, your state government's going to say, hey, either it's the cities have no powers except for what the state tells you can do, or it's the opposite. You have everything unless we tell you you don't have it. And there's, depending on which state you're in, one or either of those will apply. So federal power, like what is it? It's a sharing of power between the federal government and the states. And you can probably see a lot of that going on if you're just turning on the news and watching it. So what I like about this map too, is shows how the entire world is kind of split in between federations and unitary states. But the US is clearly a you know, federalism, excuse me, federation. And if you look at Europe, Germany's kind of sandwiched in between a bunch of blue, which I thought was very interesting as well. So now why does that matter, right? So all of this matters because these cases that come through the system kind of determine how we planners navigate whether I'm on the public side and I'm representing a government, or whether I'm on the private side and I'm representing a landowner. It kind of helps navigate, how we work through these issues that might come up. So, and most planners in the US are all very familiar with Nolan Dolan. And, so if you hear that in your day-to-day work, you might be like, what is that? Well, Nolan is a case that went up against the California Coastal Commission. And it's a really interesting case where a family or a person by the name of Nolan wanted to demolish one of their bungalows, and instead, in its place, build a bigger house. So they went to go pull a permit, and basically they said, well, if you want to get this permit, you're going to have to allow this public access to the beach. And they justified it by saying that their laws required that everybody have this view of the beach from the road. So if you see the term SCOTUS, that means the Supreme Court of the United States. So what happens is people file lawsuits, and then it kind of works its way up the court system. And ultimately, this one got all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made a determination that, yeah, the state can't just say, you can only get a permit if you do X, Y, and Z. There has to be an essential nexus. And what does essential nexus mean? There has to be a legitimate state interest, and that there has to be a justification for the ask and the condition to have a relationship to each other. So in this specific instance, the exaction, what the state wanted to take from the landowner, was beach access. Its stated purpose was a view of the beach, and the Supreme Court said that doesn't really, no one can see the beach from the road with that, so that doesn't make any sense. So the burden was on the California Coastal Commission to justify it, and the SCOTUS in their terminology did not say reasonable relationship. They said essential nexus. So moving on to the next case, which is Dolan, that talks about how when the government takes something from a landowner, there has to be a proportional relationship to the ask. So in this case, this is Dolan, so that's why it's funny that it kind of rhymes with Nolan. But in this case, the Oregon drugstores, a pharmacy, Apotheca, wanted to expand, and the city imposed a permit condition that said they had to do easements for a bike path, and they had to add a drainage area, and it made a lot of the site unbuildable, or 20% here. So the city had adopted a greenway plan that had included their property. So basically, again, a lawsuit was filed. I don't want to do this. A lawsuit was filed that went up the system, ended up at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that there has to be, that having a bona fide interest or legitimate public interest isn't enough. It has to be roughly proportionate to what you're asking for. So in other words, they can really only ask you for something that's relative to what you're asking for. So another way of talking about that is, if I build a house and I have to pay a fee for the house, it has to be proportionate to the size of my house. So people on a bigger house might pay more than on a smaller house. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we mean proportionate.
Right. So, my first reaction to this, if I may just like jump in, is, oh my goodness, what a pain in the neck, right? In terms of, I want to build these things, I just want to do my thing. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden there's all these rules that I now need to follow. And do you get a lot of reactivity from people that say, why should I? Or businesses, I want to make a nicer storefront. Why should I, give beach access? I mean, do you want to just say something quickly, like
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, that's why I have a job. So, if everything was easy, I wouldn't have a career. So, yeah, I mean, we hear that a lot. And so again, that's where as planners, we're all about trying to find that balance and trying to understand the regulations. And a lot of what I do is educating, the landowners or whoever is the person applying for the permit, educating them and why it is the way it is. So, as there's no such thing as a free lunch, I guess, right? So, yes, that's part of what, urban planners have to do is we have to navigate. And if you're an urban planner working on the government side, a lot of what you might be doing is like if you're master planning a big city, which, occurs in China a lot from what I've learned from some of my Chinese colleagues, is that, if you're doing a big master plan and you want input from people, you might actually seek that input in different ways. And things that we do here in the US is like having meetings, doing surveys, just getting that feedback. So it kind of works on both sides. You could be on the public side and you want to implement a new rule or policy on beach access. And there's ways then that you have to go through it to get that law in effect. And then there's the private side where, we're constantly educating and navigating our landowners. Okay, if you want to do this, this is what it's going to cost. This is the things that you have to do so they can make a decision as to whether or not they should expand or not. Like there might be an instance where, like a pharmacy wants to expand and it might not be worth it to expand it. So part of my job is to explain it, to say, these are the factors that you have to take into consideration if you want to expand, and it's going to cost XYZ. And then they can work it into their budget and make an informed decision. So a lot of what I do is helping people make an informed decision based on regulations and laws, and they're different everywhere. If you're in a city, you got to look at the city laws. If you're in a county, you got to look at the county laws. And every place is different. So you really have to kind of look at, that specific jurisdiction.
Yes, and I think for our viewers from other places, this is something that is, especially in California, it's been pointed out that there's a lot of laws and rules and regulations and permits that you have to get to be able to build anything. And this will not be any different in Europe for sure. And I think for maybe some of our Asian colleagues, this is a different experience because things are much faster, more expedited, I believe, from what I understand, to the way it's regulated here.
Yeah, right, probably. So we're going to move on to the next one. Were you done or?
Yes,
Okay.
because now we're moving to something really good. It's like why there's all these rules and regulations.
So one of the things that Dr. Lucci really wanted to talk about is sort of global trends. And one of the big trends is sort of big events are happening. California just suffered a bunch of serious wildfires, catastrophic wildfires. We had two hurricanes in Florida back to back the end of last fall, September and October. We had Hurricane Helene, which came and hit, and everybody had debris out on the streets waiting to be picked up, and things were really backed up, only to find out that Hurricane Milton was going to come a couple weeks later, and everybody was worried that that would pick up all the debris and just create even more catastrophic losses. So at any rate, we as planners really don't get into, or we're advised not to get into the causes of the events, like whether it's climate change or any other scientific, like we don't really get into the cause. We just get into, we have to deal with rising sea levels. We have to deal with increasing storms. We have to deal with like building resiliency regardless as to what the cause is behind it. And we can look to some of our partners in other countries, like in the Netherlands, for example. Well, they've been living below sea level for over 1,000 years, and they have found ways to navigate that situation. So anyways, this is a picture of Hurricane Helene approaching Florida, and I'm can't really see it, but Tampa is sort of like on the, I want to point to it, but I can't. So at any rate, it's approaching Florida just north of where I am. That eye is going into what we call the panhandle. So Florida kind of bends, and it was going straight towards that panhandle. So at any rate, moving on to Hurricane Milton that came a couple of weeks later, We had no gas and we didn't really have a lot of time to get all the gas stations refueled. People had to evacuate. There were all kinds of catastrophic losses that occurred. There's a picture of a woman there who's looking at the trees falling on her property and destroying significant property damage. A lot of the roads turned into rivers. And you can see that one picture up in the upper right-hand corner where the boat is in a parking lot. So what happened is when all the waters kind of came in, and that boat picture might have been Helene. So I'm not really sure. It was under the Milton pictures, but it might have been Helene because when the water came in, any boats that weren't moved from the area, if they got loose, if they weren't, tied up properly, then they kind of just went wherever. And then as the waters came back out again, the boats just sort of landed wherever they were. So I literally had friends that were navigating boats out of their yards on their properties, trying to make sure that boats weren't going to land in their pool or in their front yard because it would be so difficult to get rid of it, post storm when the waters recede again. So at any rate, there's lots of different components to what happens when a storm hits. Oh, and this is an interesting picture. So this is a picture of a baseball stadium called Tropicana Field. It's where the Tampa Bay Rays play, and it had been used as a staging area because it's got a good vast space and it's centrally located. But this is what happened when Milton came through. The entire roof just got destroyed. So it's probably not the best place to stage for a hurricane emergency. But that's just an example of how big this storm was and the catastrophic effect it had on so many people. So what do we do as planners, right? So as planners, we help to build resiliency. And what does that mean? Well, it means so many different things at so many different levels. And we could probably talk for hours about it all night long. But some jurisdictions really require, like if they're on a coast, like St. Petersburg, Florida, they'll require new businesses to have like evacuation plans. And, so basically the business owners need to think about, okay, what's going to happen if an emergency happens? And, these are the steps that I'm going to take. And it's not even just about evacuating, it's also about reentry. So like if you're a hotel, like maybe having an area for people to take showers or to have an area if there's a, generator backup that you can charge your phone. So it's not just about evacuation, it's also about reentry. So resiliency requires we prepare, before the storm comes. And if you have a plan, then when the storm comes, you can execute the plan. And then when the storm leaves, you can re-enter. Because sometimes surviving the storm is one thing, but then picking up the pieces afterwards is another thing. So a lot of the local jurisdictions offered sandbag locations where they just had piles of dirt and you would have to bring your own shovel. They would give you the bags and the ties, but you had to shovel the sandbags. And a lot of people use the sandbags to protect their properties from water intrusion. And then the bottom picture on the right is hurricane shutters. So a lot of houses, like my house, for example, I'm in a voluntary evacuation area. I'm not in a mandatory evacuation area, but all the new houses within a certain distance pretty much all come with storm shutters. So, and they're pretty light and easy to mount. And then allegedly my house is secure up to 150 miles an hour. Thankfully, I have never had to test that out. We did test it out for sure, but not at 150 miles an hour, because what happens is when the hurricane hits land, it starts to slow. So the idea is the farther it goes inland, the weaker it gets. And the top picture there is mandatory evacuations for zones A, B, and C. So basically we have these maps and everybody should know their evacuation zone if they're in one. And if you're in a mandatory evacuation zone, you are mandated to get out. Because I'm not in a mandatory evacuation zone, it's important for me to stay off the roads so that I can leave the roads open for those that need to evacuate. So when I hear a storm's coming, I get my gas filled up, I go shopping, load it all up, and just, put my shutters up and wait it out. So then again, the power companies. So what the power companies start doing is they find safe locations. So I don't know how many people have seen the US, and it's kind of different also from state to state. So where I live, when you get to a subdivision, the lines go underground. But outside the subdivision, the big power lines are kind of above ground. So those lines can be susceptible then when a big storm comes and it's super windy. So I like these pictures because they really show how serious the power companies take it, and they will stage their areas so that they'll be ready to respond. Because now, mind you, we see that big white hurricane coming towards us, but nobody really knows where it's going to land, right? So if you're on the left side versus the right side of the eye, what we call the eye, which is right in the middle, it can really impact, your area. So what happened with Milton is because we were on this one side of it, like the wind came this way. So like my neighbor, she lost her fence, but I didn't lose mine, right? Because I had it was because of the way the winds were turning, her fence happened to be the way it was positioned more susceptible than mine. Looks like nothing happened. So at any rate, yeah, the power companies are staged and ready, and they did a fantastic job getting out there and prioritizing. We had, for example, like Tampa General Hospital, which is the main hospital in Tampa. They have this wall that they put up around it. They moat themselves in. They have their own generators to back up. So they don't really need to evacuate quite like some other areas do, like some of the nursing homes where old elderly and handicapped people might be located. Those people get evacuated, like they're pretty much, part of mandatory evacuation A. So they get transported to other nursing homes that are maybe out of the evacuation area. So it's a serious thing. And the good thing about hurricanes is that we have a lot of warning that they're coming. And so we have time to prepare. So we in Florida have gotten pretty good at buckling down, hunkering down, doing what we have to do, so that this way we can, ride out the storm or evacuate.
It's interesting when you speak about resiliency, from a perspective of, more from the psychology perspective of it. It really is this internally built system of, being able to move with whatever is necessary, right? And not collapsing.
Yeah.
And I love
Scary. I mean,
this is
you're right,
like
it's
this is
scary.
yeah, this is like geared towards the outside, then this ability to do that on the inside from a psychology perspective allows you to connect the dots on the environmental and societal perspective in a bigger framework, because then you can plan and prepare, because you have that mindset also of being very matter of fact about it, which is what needs to be done, what are the causes, how do I mitigate them, how do I want to work with them, how do I save lives ahead of time. So this is then resiliency taken from a personal perspective to a community perspective and then to a societal perspective, which is incredibly important. But it's not possible if we do not stay in that space. And again, like, you keep mentioning it, these are the points that are important. These are the points that come where things come together. So community, community, community to then be society and to be able to respond properly to
Right.
something like this,
But
which
a lot of us were really sad afterwards, like we had friends that, lost their homes, and you plus also you have to, like, they don't pass over you quickly. Like we got rain for like hours and hours and hours, and you just hear the storm, and you hear it outside, and you're kind of bunkered inside your house, so you can't really see what's going on because you got everything shuttered up. And it takes its toll on people. So the next week when we got back to work, it was like, well, we really can't pretend everything's okay. Like, hey, how are you? Everything's great. Woo. Like, like my friend lost her house. I spent the whole weekend cleaning up debris and, finding her a place to sleep and, trying to rescue what clothes we could rescue. So it was very traumatizing. So, but I think that when you have a good sense of community and everybody kind of really gets together and helps each other, and we saw a lot of collaboration and cooperation and just people helping each other. And the good part of some of the social media aspect is, like, I had a friend who was kind of moated in her house, and I was like, all right, you want me to paddle board over? I have an inflatable paddle board. I can come get you if you need to come to my house and, take a shower or get some food, or I could bring you something, so, just the fact that we can use a lot of the technology available to us today to help each other.
Yeah, that's the other part, I think, very important is the technology bit. And again, that ability to bounce back,
Right.
really important. Thank you.
Yeah. So are we ready to move on to the next
Yeah,
global trend?
yeah,
So I think, so every country that I've been to, micromobility means sort of using any kind of form of transportation that you can get, whether it's an e-scooter, a bicycle, an e-bike. In Florida, the golf carts are super popular. I don't know if I'd call that micromobility. I call that more a vehicle, but okay. So, um, micromobility and sharing roads, right? So roads are a limited space, right? Paths, multi-use paths are a limited space. And when you have all these different types of micromobility, there's always a chance of conflict. So we as planners are always looking for ways to help, find tools and ways to minimize that conflict and allow people the flexibility to take advantage of these micromobility options, like the e-scooters and the e-bikes and that kind of thing. So the first picture here is that this bus is Pasco County. That's where I am zooming from right now. And what we did here is, because a lot, the Florida and Pasco, everything's so far away from each other. We have big distances. We basically put these bike racks on the bus so that people could ride their bikes to the bus shelter, wait for the bus, put the bike on the rack, and then, go where they got to go, and then bike to their end destination and back. So, this is an example of the bike rack on the front. Yes, it's limited in how many bikes it can carry. And so we're still kind of working on how to improve that so they don't have to actually take the bike with them on the bus. But it's a great concept. So it allows people to use multiple modes of transportation sort of at the same time. And let's go on to the next one. So what are kind of some of the tools and the technology available to us in this day and age to sort of maximize the use of micromobility, and then also maintain safety for pedestrians and basically all users of micromobility, whether you're a bicyclist or whether you're a scooter rider or whether you're a pedestrian. We want to make it safe for everybody. So one of the things that we're doing in Pasco County is we're testing out this new technology to study critical locations. And this just kind of shows you the sites that we're sort of testing out. And if we like what we see, we're going to expand it. So in the olden days, when you wanted to count cars or count bikes or count people, they used to put these little tubes across the path. And then as a bike or somebody goes over it, it just takes a count. But it's very static, like, information. It doesn't really give you a lot of background about what type of user is using this path. So we now have this new technology that basically, it looks like a light, but it just shoots, out this infrared. And we have ones on the sides and we have ones overhead. And basically it does sort of the same thing. It just kind of counts traffic, micromobility traffic. And this is just kind of what it looks like here. It's a smart camera. It's high quality portable camera. It's capable of detecting and tracking multimodal classifications, whether that's a automobile, whether it's a truck, whether it's a bus, whether it's a motorcycle, whether it's a bicyclist, a pedestrian, or a scooter. It's artificially intelligent powered analysis, so it's AI powered. And it also does this, what we call a near miss analysis. And I'll get to that in a minute. But this is a great example of how it can
Great.
function, right? So if you look to the picture on the right, the
Mhm.
green or that's the cars, the car traffic, right? So you can see that's a real intense user and it doesn't really deviate too much. Here you can see the bike lanes, right? So the blue are the bike lanes. So you can see it kind of like, going out here, going there, and you can see some of the blue lines kind of, it's not as concentrated. So that's picking up all the people that are kind of going around. The red is the red is the sidewalk, so that's a lot of the pedestrians, or it could be, no, the yellow is the pedestrians. So at any rate, you can see the yellow, right? You see the crosswalk here, but then you see a lot of little straggly yellow lines in the background, and that's the people who aren't crossing at the crosswalk. So now you take that with the video shot, and you can see all the different pedestrians in the background there. I don't know if you see them, like one guy's walking pretty much, a couple people are walking right in front of cars. So that's what this
Yeah.
technology does, is it shows you where your risk spots are. Now, there could be a lot of reasons why those pedestrians are crossing back there. And that could be because the bus stop is over here and not there, so they don't want to walk past it and walk back. Maybe it doesn't look safe. Maybe there is different lighting. So this basically is just a tool for planners to kind of dig deeper into why aren't people using the crosswalk and what can we do to either bring them to the crosswalk, or maybe we need to move the crosswalk, or maybe we move the bus stop. There's so many different answers to find solutions, but this data really helps navigate that discussion. So you're spending your money wisely, right? When you're like, well, why did we put the crosswalk there? It's not in a location that people are going to use. So let's move it, or let's add another one, down the road.
So I think this is a really, really important point. First of all, you are really collecting user data in the sense, I mean, you could be collecting it for a number of reasons, but you really understand people's behavior on this road with this one picture,
Right.
one shot, and you could do several times a day so that are there differences between morning, afternoon, and night? And then you can say, well, the behavior changes in this and this way. And it gives you an objective way to look at it and to solve problems, just in a lot of ways that you would do it in design. Anyways, you would collect that data. And for anybody looking, and because we've had these hot discussions and also about, how do I collect behavioral data? Right. So depending on what I'm doing, does it have to be psychophysiological, for example? Well, that's one way. That's the internal road system. And you can capture that as well. But as soon as you get into group behavior, this type of thing is magic, right? Being able to understand it. I almost wonder, do they have those in stores where people are going to purchase off of shelves, I'm just wondering, right? Like, because it's such an important part of business. And in this case for you, it's really gearing towards representing a party, but also for policy making. Because trying to make the rule that no, people have to be on the crosswalk, and we will just give fines for all those little yellow lines that are going over.
That's not what we're doing here, but this is just for allocating money towards safety improvements.
Right. But
And
like, I love that way of thinking, right? This is like a turnaround versus these are the rules. That's the way you're going to behave. It's like, oh no, let's look at what's going on for people and why they're doing this. And then
right.
let's find a safe way to lean into that.
Yes,
Magic.
absolutely. So there is, so we did talk when we looked at the software, we did have big discussions about privacy. Because obviously, so there are safeguards in place to protect people's privacy. So, like the data is only collected, like the videos are only saved for a certain amount of time. It can't be used for certain things. It can only be used for this data collection and to make these safety improvements. So there are definitely privacy safeguards in place for the use of the technology.
Thank you for adding that. That's a huge point.
So this is I love this heat map because this is a traditional near miss technology. So what this tells you is this area there are a lot of near misses. So, and what is a near miss? That means there could have been a crash, but there wasn't one. So somebody walked in front of something or somebody rode out in the middle of something. It was definitely a near miss. So that gives us that gives us the indication that we need to look at this area and we need to see why these things are happening and what can we do do we need to add a traffic light? Do we need to add a crosswalk where a pedestrian presses the button and then everything flashes and then the vehicles have to come to a stop? So again, it's just a tool, another tool in the toolbox for planners to just continue to make our roads safer. And when we make our roads safer, they're more usable for everybody. So this is another good one. This is the predictive crash detection. So you can see the little yellow squiggly lines. There was going back to that near miss heat map that we just showed. This one here basically shows how a pedestrian walked in front of these vehicles and there was definitely could have been something that happened. So that's definitely this intersection. You can see there really doesn't look like there's any kind of traffic controls there. So it definitely would be, as a result of this data, a potential candidate. So it also helps jurisdictions allocate their money, right? So you got one pot of money for safety, where are we going to put it? And this crash data and the predictive crash detection and the heat maps and all this technology will just help a local jurisdiction allocate those funds. So, and with that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Lucci before we go on to the next item.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for showing this. Yes, on the one hand, and I really love the fact that you brought that up in terms of ethics of collecting the data and is there anything that's stored in a personal way? Obviously not, especially with the heat maps. Think that those things are really quite good because it's a conglomeration of different people at the same point in time. So you can see how that probably, I would assume, makes people feel more comfortable about that, or maybe not. But yeah, thank you for bringing that in.
Sure. So, policy making amid geopolitical shifts. Again, we could probably spend the whole night talking about this, but I think the main thing is, and I have this little, and most of you are probably too young to ever remember this, but when I grew up as a child, there was this TV show that was kind of like Sesame Street. It was called The Electric Company, and they always had like these little scenes where there was conflict and, or kids fighting over a toy. And it was always like, let's cooperate, so that always stayed with me, throughout the years. And there's a lot of noise and buzz going around, whether you're on social media or not on social media, or the news or the TV or business, there's just we're surrounded by a lot of white noise. And all I can say is I just try to always focus on the issue. Like, what's the issue? Listen, we're not all always going to agree on everything. And conflict is unfortunately sometimes a part of life. But if we listen and we think about it and we collaborate, we can just focus on the issue and just get rid of the white noise that's all around us. So, and I know that might sound, maybe it sounds a little corny in today's day and age, but I find I just need to focus on the issue. Like, what's the issue? What's the root cause of this? And once I kind of identify that, and if I'm not listening to what other people are saying, then I might not be able to come up with a creative solution. So planners in particular, because we're constantly thrown in the middle of some really passionate topics that some people feel very passionate about, like even just post-hurricane, the permitting post-hurricane. I think the city of St. Pete, everyone's got to pull a permit to rebuild. Well, do you hit the 50% rule or not hit the 50% rule? So these local jurisdictions have been working really hard to help people pull permits to rebuild their houses. So it doesn't really matter what the aspect in planning is, whether it's a hurricane or pre or post resiliency, or whether it's pulling a permit for your house or whether it's building a new subdivision or building an industrial building. You just got to kind of listen to, what everybody's saying, and then just try to come up with a collaborative solution. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have, and this is kind of goes into the next slide, we might have meetings with neighbors, and, just we'll take down all of their grievances, fears, concerns, and we'll just talk about how we're going to address it. So I won't jump to the next slide yet, but things that we can do, like if a neighbor is worried about a new development coming in next door, they'll be like, well, I don't want that there. I'm used to looking at open space and I want it to stay open space. Well, in the US, unless you're going to buy it, the person who owns that has the right to do what they can with it. So in accordance with the land development regulations that apply. So, but there are things that we can do to minimize the impact of new development on, people that have already been there, that are used to living in a certain way. We can do the dark sky friendly lighting, right? So that's a big trend right now in the US, where we're trying to protect the lights from going too high and damaging. A lot of nighttime lights can damage some of the nocturnal animals. And, there's always these talk about light pollution. Sorry if I sneeze, I'll turn away for a second. So, so they have these dark sky friendly lights where it makes sure that all the lights are face down. If, if a neighbor is worried about, like, say, an industrial warehouse going up next door, we can design the site so the buildings are kind of like around it, and then the activity with the trucks is internal. So, and then we can add trees and buffers and hedges and pretty flowers, and we can make things nice so that when the person's coming home, they don't see the big old warehouse. They just see the trees and the hedges and the masonry wall. And again, and they'll be protected from the lights because we're using dark sky friendly lights, and we're minimizing their impacts by directing activity internal to this, campus. So that's just an example of things then that we can, as we're going through the collaboration phase, that we can offer up. Obviously, we might not be able to change somebody's mind in terms of, I just don't want that to go there. I've lived here all my life and I don't want it to change. But, unfortunately, progress, so I always say everybody wants progress, nobody wants change. But with progress, there comes a price, and it is our jobs as planners to try to help mitigate that. When I say mitigate, that's finding alternative solutions to try to help reduce the change that it's going to have on the people that live around there.
Or maybe just the stress of it, right? I mean, really, it's you're addressing certain. Can you just go back for a second, just because I wanted to underline this as really providing a solution on how to navigate the things that you were talking about, which is this idea of progress, or at least dynamic change. This is the systems approach, and it is really dealing with systems changing and evolving in a way that is cooperative. That means that you enable parts of the system to communicate with each other. And that's what you're doing. And yes, of course, you're focusing on a specific issue, but you're listening in to all the different parties, which means that is how you're activating the system and the cooperation. And so everybody wants a different type of progress too. And you're right. A lot of people want certain changes, but not to maybe their habits, which is, again, why it's so important to work with a technology that measures in the habits, so that you can constructively also talk about things that people are not aware that they're doing.
Right. So, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it made me think of the fact that, like, so, and this trend I think is worldwide, instead of going to a store to buy what I need, I just pull up my phone and I press a little button and it arrives at my house 2 hours later or tomorrow. That phenomena has really altered our landscape and transportation, particularly in Florida, So like, warehouses are going up everywhere, right? Because you have the major warehouses, then you have the local warehouses, because there's this whole big distribution network. And we're seeing a big trend for these needs for these warehouses in key locations, like near interchanges, like near major intersections. So as people like Amazon and these other online retailers really kind of navigate this changing environment. So every time somebody, presses that button, and that's what I kind of explain sometimes. I'm like, well, how many times did you order from Amazon today? That's the reason why this warehouse is coming up across the street from you, right? Because we're changing the way we do things, and the market and the world is always responding to it. There's always like a cause and effect. So a lot of these warehouses are going up in key strategic locations. And during one of my recent trips to Europe, and a friend of mine too, she's like, oh my gosh, they have these big warehouses. And what a lot of times what these warehouse campuses are doing is they're finding themselves next to each other. They're co-locating. So you'll have the Amazon distribution center, and then you'll have UPS or FedEx right next to it, right? So FedEx is going to go here, pick it up, and then go make a delivery. Or then you also have like a pet supply company. So you'll have the FedEx in their big warehouse, you'll have Amazon's big warehouse, and then you'll have a big pet company's warehouse, right? So they're different, but they're complementary, and they all kind of work together. So we're seeing a lot of demand for that type of a structure, which is a little different than, in the olden days, you might go to a mall and go shopping. And, now all the malls are kind of emptying out and are in dire need of redevelopment. So we're kind of shifting towards making those like mini little new developments or cities with multi-use housing and mixed use, and trying to revitalize those areas creatively. And then in exchange, now we're using up land for these big warehouses. So it's always the landscape's always changing, right? Figuratively and literally.
Well,
So
here is like part of the debate, right? So we can talk about sustainability until we're blue in the face. If we're not realizing, or we don't have the self-awareness around our personal habits, and I know one of our colleagues, Dr. Gutentag, likes to speak about this too, like the awareness of our own habits,
right.
that allows that change where there's a decision behind it. If you don't have the awareness, you're sort of at the mercy of it. And then if you order a lot and then you're complaining about the warehouses, well, there's that link missing. But in your job, what I think is just so magical is this ability to bring all of these dots together and say, this is what's happening. Look at the data. This is just the objective data that we have about this as a habit. What would you like to say to it? And this idea of listening in is something incredibly transpersonal. It's active listening. It's really just really focusing on what's going on for that party, then going to the other parties and listening in too. And then, getting together and collaborating and thinking and finding solutions. But, if you don't tie all these things together, you're not going to have systems thinking, and then you're going to focus on one little box and get potentially really upset about it, when it is really about a whole picture. And then again, like the whole person comes into play, because if you don't show up as a whole person, then you can't know, you don't have the self-awareness, and that bites itself again. So this model that you're bringing forward, I think is incredibly important in our day and age, at the very moment on like, how do we deal with some of these crucial issues that are at hand in a way that is responsible and ethical, and also helps our society and globally as well. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. So we ready for the next slide?
Yes, we are.
So this just kind of ties right back to everything. And that's the whole system approaches. So, community meetings is a really good way to do outreach. I kind of talked about this before, and it's all about finding that balance, right? So, education, reaching out to people, taking surveys, you know, the community meeting is really a critical aspect of bringing information to the community. I've been to a few of them where, people get very, very, very angry, and I try my best to explain things, but, a lot of times, sometimes they still don't, like what you're saying. And it's not really you personally, but it's just they don't, their character of their community is changing and they don't know how to stop it. And we've seen a lot of growth to Florida, even despite the hurricanes, people are still kind of coming. But now that the coast has been so impacted, we think that we might be seeing a trend where people move inland. So so we're constantly dealing with this changing environment, so we're always trying to think up of new ways to reach out to people. And I've seen local governments do like surveys where everybody comes to the workshop and they kind of are rolling out new ideas. And then you have like a little, you know, handheld, and then you could use nowadays, you can use your cell phone. So, and then you just respond via your cell phone. So they ask you these questions, they show different pictures, and then they get data that they can use and they go back to make policy. So there's a lot of tools out there in today's day and age, and thankfully, like we used to have like separate handhelds, and you can still do that, but a lot of times now it's as simple of look at your phone, press this link and answer these questions, right? So we're constantly trying to find better ways to outreach and reach people and get input and educate. So, yeah. And with that, I will hand it back to Dr. Lucci, and I think we got plenty of time. We're like right on time. So we got plenty of time for questions. I'm not sure what the format is. And hopefully I didn't speak too quickly, and I'm happy to rehash something if I did speak too quickly.
No, so we're happy to take questions. I also have some questions that are still open, and also maybe some comparisons, right? We had talked about as well the importance of policy making, period, your map of guiding, cooperation in this day and age to find pragmatic solutions to the many, many problems and shifts that are occurring at the moment. And I want to go back to that. So one of the questions was related to that. What was one of the challenges, like one of the situations where you would say that was so difficult in getting an agreement, but you still did it?
Well, well, that's a very good question. Okay, so I worked on an industrial project a couple of years back, and the neighbor wasn't really happy. They're big landowners, both big landowners. So, and they were not really happy about what was going on. So they kind of used this road and where the road was going and the alignment of the road to kind of protest it. And then he also called some of the environmental authorities and had them come out and basically accused my client of hurting a gopher tortoise burrow. So gopher tortoises are a protected species in Florida. And it turns out that through some of the activity on the site, they did some farming that this gopher tortoise burrow might have been impacted. So they
Right.
literally were sitting on the sidelines with these like Zoom cameras, just waiting to take pictures. Then it ended up in the newspapers, and my client got a ticket for the gopher tortoise. And it was just, he was embarrassed by the whole thing. And, it just, the press was very, sometimes you got to be careful what you read in the newspapers because they didn't call us to ask us our side. They just took these pictures and, and just kind of like put it in the newspaper. So that was challenging, right? Because, my client was embarrassed. Clearly, he doesn't want to hurt a turtle, and, wasn't really intentional, or the tortoise, right? A turtle is in water, tortoise is on land. So how the gopher tortoises work or how they live in Florida is they burrow and they kind of, nest underground and stuff. So at any rate, we basically, I had to call the natural resource department and I walked them through it. They showed up at the hearing. Everybody was ready for a battle. And so I consulted my client and I got clear direction from him on how he wanted to do. So from my perspective is, unless he's asking me to do something illegal, I have to always advocate for him. So that's the line, right? Is he breaking a law or not? And he wasn't, right? So I have to advocate for him. So what I did was I explained the situation, what happened, and he was going to appear in court to pay this ticket. And, he was going to take care of it, and we're going to address it, and we're going to make sure that the ticket is cleared before he does anything else on the site. And, it actually became a non-issue, and it did not stop the approval from going through, but it required a lot of behind the scenes, like calling natural resources, explaining the situation, calling, the opposition and saying, hey, we're really sorry. These are the steps that we're going to take to make it happen. Because you got to understand that sometimes you're not the one on your site. You might own it, but other people could be, on there doing stuff, like the farmer, like you might have leased it out to a farmer and there's cattle and, there's activity going on that's sort of, separate from, it's not necessarily the landowner personally who's doing the activity. So we basically had to, work it out. I think it was I can't remember, but I think it was no contest on the ticket for the gopher tortoise, and everything was okay. But still, it was awkward, it was uncomfortable, and, nobody wants to hear that a gopher tortoise got hurt or could potentially get hurt due to a certain situation. So yeah, so that was definitely a challenging one.
So it's so interesting, right? Because from a from a standby perspective, or somebody who doesn't live in Florida, that's like, what is the big deal, right? But it is fascinating how these little things can become so huge. And it strikes me when you were just speaking that your role is really that of a local psychologist in a way, because you are leaning in and you're
Yeah.
listening to everyone's reaction to it and addressing it fully.
Yeah. So
And
gopher tortoises are a big deal in Florida. Like, people will stop their cars and if
oh,
one of them is crossing the street, they will get out and move. And you always have to if it's a turtle or a tortoise, regardless, you have to move them in the direction that they're going. So like like I said, the gopher tortoises are protected species here.
I was
So
just gonna say that.
yeah. So it's called a taking, right? Or so you can
Right.
get a big violation with the Department of Environmental Protection if you've impacted a protected species in a negative way.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like, that could get very emotional. All it takes is some, animal activists, coming in, and then that could spice things up even more. So yeah,
So
so
we got lots of questions here. So
yeah, 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 yeah. Hold on
can we do
here.
that?
Why?
How
I
can we
have even
effectively?
more on the back end.
Well,
So
there's a really good one here about inclusivity and sustainability, which I did not even go into inclusivity.
okay. Oh yes. Let's do it.
So inclusivity, I'm so glad whoever asked that question. That's a fantastic question. So what does that mean, inclusivity, right? So just for everybody out there, it means, so one of the things that I am committed to as a planner is, yeah, and that ties in with the next question from Dr. Gutentag about the affordable housing. So inclusivity means, so in the United States, and I can only really talk about, from my experiences because I've only done planning in the US, but in the United States, we had this thing in the 70s that was called redlining. And basically they would draw little zones on a map and say white people could live here, black people could live here. And that was called redlining. And then it went through the systems and it's illegal. You cannot, put people in certain places based on race. So one of my jobs as a planner is to undo the injustices of the past. And inclusivity means making a place where everyone feels welcome, where everyone can live, and where everyone has a part in that space. So to me, inclusivity means diverse. A big example of how I promote inclusivity is diverse housing options. So when I master plan communities that have diverse housing options, you get diverse people, right? You get and it's not just racial diversity, it's income diversity. So, there's a lot of divides that are socioeconomic now and not, necessarily racial demographics. So I think that inclusivity is a big topic. It's something we're always striving to do better. Diverse housing is one. And having there's been all kinds of studies done that certain cities have like food deserts where people don't even have access to healthy food. So we're constantly coming up with strategies to bring food to the desert, to the food desert, to promote diverse housing options. And affordable housing is a big part of that. So our governor here in Florida is actually a real big proponent of affordable housing. And he actually, and the state legislature put in this act, it's a state law, that basically says if anything's zoned commercial or industrial, you can put affordable housing in it and you don't have to get permission from your local jurisdiction. And the reason why this has been kind of coming to such a head is because a lot of people who want to do affordable housing, all the other people that live there will come and be like, we don't want that in our backyard. We don't want that here. Go put it somewhere else. This isn't a good fit here. So what happens, and this is a really good example that ties back into one of my earlier slides about the federal, the state, and the local. So what the state's doing now is saying, sorry, local, you don't get to say you don't like it because you don't like it. We're going to it's called preemption. We're going to preempt you and we're going to allow affordable housing to go in these spaces and you don't have a say in that. So and it's still kind of, it comes up every year and it gets, the laws get tweaked, but, and I'm kind of covering a big complex issue in a really simple way.
I was
There's
just gonna say.
lot more to it, but yeah, so affordable housing is definitely a hot topic, and we're always trying to find more ways. And I just met with community development with an affordable housing developer, excuse me, last Friday. And they basically said, listen, we just want diverse income levels within a multi-family, like within an apartment building. And we'll give you money. We'll give you money. We'll help subsidize if you allocate a certain portion. And they call it like 60% of average median income, average mean income, or 80%. So they do these like calculations on what the average income is. And then they'll say, we want you to target 60% and under, or we want you to target 80% and under. And we're going to give you money to help make your numbers work.
Right,
So
which then does give, this diversity and why is that even important? So many times we talk about this because it brings to the table many different viewpoints, many different ways of living. And that's important in itself. I think the term meritocracy has been hot on the lips. Also, and
we're in an affordable housing crisis. I mean, we have a national housing supply
right,
crisis.
right. But what I was going to say to that is just in terms of that is everyone has something to contribute. So this idea that meritocracy and diversity are separate issues is not really they're not. They're really tied together, and I think it's important to remember that, as we forget that so easily. And that's why this is important in your job. And thank you, Dr. Gudenthal, for bringing that up. And also for that question. So we have some questions that come out of a live stream and are not here in this room. So we have another one that I thought was really good. How can we effectively balance the interests of private developers and public needs when making land use decisions? And I think that's an important question globally, right? So it's not just a US market question or a Europe?
So
I think
So
that's everywhere.
it is a great question, and there's lots of different ways, right? And a lot of it also depends on how big the site is. So, like, I've worked on sites that are 7,000 acres, and I've worked on sites that are 10 acres. So, the 7,000 acre site, we donated schools, land for schools, we donated land for parks, we donated land for conservation. Well, not me personally, but I mean the project did. So basically what happens is when, and that's the reason why your land development regulations are so important, because you can't, like I said in my first slide, you can't just take it for no reason. You have to have policies that kind of guide, we need so many schools for so many population, we need so many parks for so many population. And these all go into the jurisdiction's development regulations. And then basically then they have a basis to say, okay, well, if you want to build 7,000 houses, that's, 18,000 people. So you need to accommodate schools and parks for 18,000 people. And then it becomes like a sort of a master planning game, or not really a game, but a
Yeah.
master planning process
Activity. Yeah.
process to actually, like, okay, we'll put the school here, we're going to put the park here, we'll put the houses here. It's master planning. And so that's how you use the master planning process and the land development regulations to sort of find, but on a 10-acre site, right? I can't give you a school, right? So that's where it has to be proportionate to what I'm asking for. So I did work on a small 10-acre site once, and they wanted us to have the corner set aside for medical uses. Then we wanted to have an apartment building, and we had a lot of wetlands on the site. So there really wasn't a lot of developable areas. So we protected the wetlands, but we amenitized it. So they did like a little boardwalk so people could walk from the apartment building around there. And then we set aside this land, which eventually became an emergency, like a smaller ER. And so that brings jobs, right? So yeah, but that site was smaller. So what I could give or what we could offer up was different than like on the 7,000 acre site.
Yeah, so basically is making intelligent choices from a land development perspective towards the community that you're moving into and that you're also creating, right? Versus just taking. And so the rules of the game are, and whole systems orientated at the moment. So, that's great. Yeah, thank you. And so you're aware of all the loopholes. I want to say loopholes in the sense that, okay, we want to put X amount here. You can look down and say, well, if you give the following things or you ask the community, what do you guys need and what do you guys want? And then you draw us up a list, then this might enable it to be a sustainable solution. So we're back at, the sustainability of it is, of course, the environment, but then also the community that you're moving into, correct? Yeah. Okay.
So that one, did you want to read that one Q3 question
Point
about?
three, yeah, I was looking at that. What are the biggest challenges local governments face when implementing land use policies that align with global sustainability goals?
That's like a loaded,
Ooh.
I mean, we don't have enough time tonight to cover that question. But I mean, one of the biggest challenges is people don't want to get out of their cars. So, everyone always asks me, what are you going to do about the traffic? What are you going to do about the congestion? And I say, are you going to get out of your car? Because if you're not, there's nothing I can do about that emission into the air, on your combustion engine. So,
Electric cars.
people, especially in America, they like the cars. So I think, like Brightline is a private high-speed rail developer, and they basically have revolutionized like Miami all the way up to, I think it's Palm Beach. They have like a high-speed train, and they're making it like a service, right? So people take it to go to the hockey games, and they're buying up all the spaces around the transit stops and building multi-use like apartment buildings and ground floor retail. So like someone like Brightline, if they were to come to like Tampa, and give us more options to get around in trains, that would help. So, but right now, some of the big challenges that local governments face is just, people not really wanting to change their lifestyles, right? So you can't make somebody take a train, you can't make somebody ride their bicycle. And then also in Florida in the summers, we have a lot of rain. So yeah, it's really hard to ride your bicycle when it's like a torrential downpour and you're getting 2 inches of rain, and how are you supposed to maneuver in that? So, someone's going to get in their car in that instance, right? So, our summers are super hot. So yeah, so it's constantly challenging. So I think that some of the things that the city of Miami has done that's really effective has been adding street trees. They add street trees everywhere they can. They vault their roads. So by vaulting, I mean like the stormwater kind of goes underneath the road. So they're basically making their roads more sustainable by vaulting it and having these pumps and making sure that the water is separated. So I think the city of Miami has done a really great job of constantly trying to find new ways to make itself more resilient in the face of, all the new challenges coming, including the risk of rising sea levels.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so
Can I toot the horn just
yeah,
for Geneva, Switzerland for a second too, just
yes,
to open it more globally. So what they've done is on bus stops with roofs, they have constructed or put in gardens on every single one of these, and they have been able to bring down the temperature of the city remarkably. I don't know, it was like 2 degrees, which
like
is a lot,
rooftop. That's great. Love
just
it.
by doing that during the summer. And of course, people standing underneath there really profit from that because it is much cooler. And then around there is much cooler, which, helps with the plants and so on and so forth. And I think, I just wanted to mention Geneva, Switzerland, but there's other places in Germany where they're doing equal things, or Central Europe where they're just closing off the center of cities, although a lot of people are very upset about it because they can't drive their cars in. But that is helpful again because the rising temperatures in the cities have become excruciating, and so a lot of people are actually dying in the summers now, especially in southern France or Spain or Portugal. So it is important to be able to work with these things pragmatically. And I just wanted to throw in, electric vehicles to like build your own dream. That's a Chinese version of the Tesla, and that is another solution, right? So they're all there. The question is just how do they get integrated into society, and
Yeah,
right, and so that's your job again. So that brings
right.
it back to okay, we have an issue in sustainability, we have an issue with the environment, or it's not just always the environment, it's people's habits. Really, I mean, we looked at that map. Are there habits that could be changeable? If nobody points it out and says, okay, this is doable, this is not, which is your job, then nobody will know, right? Because they'll think like, okay, well, why can't we just do it? Doesn't matter. um
So the e-vehicles on the coast ended up being a disaster environmentally because of the saltwater intrusion.
uh,
So yeah, it was bad.
oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I don't know. There's got to be a better way to solve that problem, or you got to get
Yes,
all the vehicles out of the coastal high hazard area if a storm's coming.
yes, yes, yes. And oh, Dr. Gutentag is another one. Are
Okay.
governments buying undeveloped land to plant trees? Nice one.
I wish they would, because that would help, right? So what we are doing though is creating private mitigation banks. So some landowners are actually creating like they're just preserving their land in perpetuity. And then what will happen is say you have to do some sort of impact to a property over here. Well, you can buy a credit. You can either mitigate it on site, or you can buy a credit and protect this area and this permanent preservation area. So the private mitigation bank has actually been a really unique tool, and it actually promotes conservation. So people have been actually competing with each other to preserve these areas. So you'll come to my bank instead of his bank to preserve the land. So it definitely creates like a sort of a private dynamic to preservation. So, but I have not seen any governments buying undeveloped land to specifically plant trees. But I do know that Pasco County has a environmental land acquisition program, and basically what they do then is we have this thing called penny for Pasco. So every time you come to Pasco County and you pay, you buy something in one of the stores, 1 penny goes to the penny for Pasco, and that penny gets split amongst a whole bunch of things. And one of them is environmental land acquisition. And then that land gets preserved in perpetuity. But I got to tell you that land management is not just easy stuff. Like it's not just like you buy it and forever. You have to manage it. And in Florida, that means managed burns on a regular basis, which California, I don't know how much they do manage burns, but in Florida, it's a critical component to maintaining the healthy ecosystems here. So the more land you have, the more you have to manage, and that
Yes,
includes
we do here too.
that includes prescribed burns. And what we'll do is we'll announce it on the public websites, because if you're living near a conservation area, you will smell smoke at some point, because we will be conducting prescribed burns. So I haven't really seen anybody specifically buying a land for trees, but we do have very active land acquisition management programs, and we have them across all the jurisdictions. And we try to connect them too. There's a whole big wildlife corridor connection plan in Florida to help, because the animals need that connectivity, right? Because they
Right.
migrate.
That's right. Well, we also need, I mean, we need a lot of, we do, we need the nature around for our own sanity for so many reasons. I mean, that's why we offer eco psychology anyways, just saying. Because it's that important from a whole person health perspective. I
Right.
did I wanted to ask you maybe something a little bit more personal. I mean, um what was, maybe a pivotal moment or a turning point in your career, or personal life that shaped this current path? Like, because you weren't always on this path. You were, doing more finance, you were, and like I mentioned in the Frankfurt Bond Exchange, you were, hardcore, uh
Mhm.
I want to say. And then, what changed? What changed?
Well, I mean, the banking career just wasn't really that fulfilling. And, you get old fast in banking, right? So I wanted to be in a job or a position where I can age in place, and we talk a lot about aging in place in terms of where you live. But, in banking at 30, you're kind of over the hill, and at 40, you're kind of ancient, and they're going to just, the chances of you getting replaced by some young whippersnapper half the price straight out of MBA is really high. So I just kind of saw the writing on the wall, and now I'm sure my job doesn't even exist anymore. Because everything's been so automated. So I saw the writing on the wall, and I just really wanted to choose a career where I can make a difference. I live in my community, so I live with the consequences of my land use decisions. So I own it, and you can stop me in the shopping center and talk to me about it. So, so I'm always trying to find ways to be better at what I do, and it makes my world a better place. And I personally am not going to solve every problem like overnight, but I can continue to do what I can in my purview to try to work things out, and build inclusivity, and undo the injustices of the past, and create social equity, right? That's a big topic, is sort of creating social equity, and people having equal chances at the American dream, or even just happiness, just living your life and being happy, and having access to good food and good schools.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, a life worth living. Yes. So, something, here's another one, and then maybe we can close off with this one. Could you share a leadership lesson you learned the hard way? Because
Uh,
I mean, all of the whole entire map that you have there really is, a map of navigating conflict and interests. and it's a leadership map in one way or another. And so, as you progressed and developed into the wisdom of that, it's like a life, it's like it's a organic life lesson. Where was it where you just had to go, oh, I learned this the hard way, like that? I didn't
It happens
read
to
all the
me every
books.
day. It happens to me. It still happens to me every day. I mean, I'm
Okay.
still, it's an ongoing process, and I'm not perfect, and I'm going to make mistakes. But all you can do is learn from them and try to do better next time. And the other thing that I've learned is that, all the different people that I work with, everybody's different, and people like things in different ways. And so it takes me sometimes a little bit to really build that trust and understand what's the best way for me to communicate with you. And it could be very different from person to person. And I still learn that every day, because the way I work with one person may be totally different than how I work with the other person. And I try my best to be adaptable and flexible, but sometimes it's just just the nature of it is sometimes it's easier with some people than others. And so we're all human. And I just sometimes you just gotta go with the flow.
Okay, so yes. Well, I love that. I think that's a huge um lesson, actually, that it's a huge learning point for everyone, all of us, is that people are so different, and we tend to underestimate it because we think we're all humans, and like, oh, of course they're gonna think the same thing in some sort of way, right? And it turns out they don't at all, and they've totally read the situation in a totally different way. So incredibly important what you just mentioned, just that one point. And learning every day, yeah, that is also, it's also key. Well, I mean, we're like right on target here. I mean, I have more, just because so many interesting things are happening geopolitically too, and to understand the landscape and how that could affect policy making, not just on a local scale, state or nationwide in the US, but also globally. Like, what does it mean with everybody setting their, the Chinese government setting its intentions for the next year and its goals that are, also, I want to say, incredibly pragmatic, and fit right into all of our discussions here today, which is stability, high quality development, innovation, reform and opening up, domestic demand, common prosperity. There we go. So very much aligned with the conversation that you were having. Green development, security, and dual circulation, and strengthening domestic economic circulation while balancing trade. So yes, so we've got a very interesting year ahead, with things being hard to gauge here in the US. So we can't say we have clear policy directions yet. And so we're just sitting in that place that you mentioned is so uncomfortable, which is change and transformation and hopefully progress. So thank you, Cynthia, for all your wisdom. Thank you, everyone, for
Alrighty.
jumping in and asking these great questions.